Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates painted their nails and talked about boys, she spent her afternoons at the local shooting range with her grandfather, a Vietnam veteran who taught her that precision and patience were more valuable than any makeup kit. Her steady hands and sharp eyes caught the attention of everyone at the range, but nobody expected much from the quiet 17-year-old with braided hair and worn-out boots. When Sarah announced her intention to join the military after high school, the reactions were predictable. Her mother cried for 3 days straight, begging her to consider nursing school instead. Her father, a mechanic who had never served, shook his head and muttered about girls not belonging in dangerous places. Even her best friend Jessica laughed, saying Sarah would probably faint at the first sight of blood. The town seemed to collectively agree that sweet, soft-spoken Sarah was making the biggest mistake of her life. The military recruiter, Sergeant Thompson, was a weathered man in his 40s who had seen countless young people walk through his office doors. When Sarah first approached him, he barely looked up from his paperwork. Another small-town girl with unrealistic dreams, he thought. He handed her the standard brochures and began his routine speech about support roles and administrative positions. Sarah listened politely, but when he mentioned combat exclusions for women, she interrupted him. "I want to be where the action is," she said quietly. "I want to serve on the front lines." Sergeant Thompson finally looked up, studying the young woman sitting across from his desk. She was barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with gentle brown eyes and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. He had to suppress a chuckle. The military had recently opened more combat roles to women, but this girl looked like she would struggle to carry a heavy backpack, let alone handle the physical and mental demands of combat operations. "Listen, Sarah," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Combat isn't like the movies. It's brutal, terrifying, and physically demanding. Most men struggle with it. Maybe you should consider something more suitable, like communications or medical support." But Sarah had already made up her mind. She had grown up hearing her grandfather's stories about brotherhood forged in battle, about the honor of serving your country when it mattered most. She wanted to be part of something bigger than herself, something that would challenge every fiber of her being. The recruiter's doubt only strengthened her resolve. The day Sarah left for basic training, half the town came to see her off. Some came to wish her well, but many came to witness what they believed would be her inevitable failure. Old Mrs. Peterson from the grocery store shook her head sadly, telling Sarah's mother that the girl would be back home within a month, probably with a nervous breakdown. Even the local pastor, who had known Sarah since she was a child, privately wondered if she truly understood what she was getting herself into. At the bus station, Sarah hugged her grandfather goodbye. He was the only person who hadn't tried to discourage her. As she pulled away, he pressed something into her hand. His old military compass, the same one he had carried through the jungles of Vietnam. "Trust yourself out there," he whispered. Sometimes the strongest warriors come in the most unexpected packages. The bus ride to Fort Benning was long and filled with nervous chatter from other recruits. Sarah sat quietly by the window, watching the familiar landscape of home disappear behind her. She could feel the stares and hear the whispered comments from the male recruits who clearly doubted her presence among them. One particularly loud young man from New York kept making jokes about having to protect the little girl once they got to training. When they arrived at the base, the chaos was immediate and overwhelming. Drill sergeants screamed orders, recruits scrambled to form lines, and the hot Georgia sun beat down mercilessly on the asphalt. Sarah found herself surrounded by men who towered over her, their voices booming as they tried to impress each other with stories of their athletic achievements and physical prowess. Drill Sergeant Williams, an imposing man with arms like tree trunks and a voice that could shatter glass, walked slowly down the line of new recruits. He stopped in front of each person, sizing them up with eyes that had seen decades of young soldiers come and go. When he reached Sarah, he paused longer than usual. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "What do we have here? You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart? The Girl Scouts meet down the street." Laughter rippled through the ranks, but Sarah stood perfectly still, her eyes focused straight ahead. She had expected this. Her grandfather had warned her that she would have to prove herself every single day, that some people would never believe in her capabilities no matter what she accomplished. That first night in the barracks, as exhausted recruits collapsed onto their narrow beds, Sarah heard the whispered conversations around her. Bets were being placed on how long she would last. Some gave her a week, Others were more generous and predicted 2 weeks before she would crack under the pressure. None of them gave her more than a month. Sarah lay in her bunk, listening to the doubt swirling around her. She thought about her comfortable bed back home, about her mother's cooking and her grandfather's encouraging words. For a moment, she wondered if everyone was right. Maybe she was too small, too soft, too naive for this world of military precision and physical demands. But then she remembered why she was here. She remembered the pride in her grandfather's eyes when she consistently hit bullseyes at the shooting range. She remembered the satisfaction of pushing herself beyond what others thought possible. She remembered her dream of serving her country in a meaningful way, of proving that strength came in many different forms. As the barracks finally quieted down, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would not just survive this training, she would excel at it. She would prove every doubter wrong, not through angry words or dramatic gestures, but through consistent performance and unwavering determination. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of her military career, and she intended to make it count. The alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., jolting everyone from their brief sleep. Sarah was already awake, having learned from her grandfather that preparation was half the battle. While other recruits stumbled around in confusion, she was already dressed and making her bed with military precision. The sight of her readiness only seemed to irritate some of the male recruits more. Physical training began immediately, and it was brutal. 5-mile runs in the scorching heat, endless push-ups, pull-ups that seemed impossible, and obstacle courses designed to break both body and spirit. Many of the larger, seemingly stronger recruits began dropping out within the first week. But Sarah kept pace, her small frame moving efficiently through each challenge. Private Johnson, a former college football player from Alabama, was particularly vocal about his doubts regarding Sarah's capabilities. During their first week, he made constant comments about how she was slowing everyone down, despite the fact that she consistently finished in the top half of their group during timed exercises. His friends laughed along, creating an atmosphere of hostility that Sarah had to navigate carefully. The breaking point came during week 3, during a particularly challenging obstacle course run. The course included rope climbing, wall scaling, and crawling under barbed wire through mud. Johnson had been struggling with the rope climb, his bulky frame working against him. When Sarah reached the obstacle, she scaled it quickly and efficiently, using technique rather than brute strength. "Lucky break," Johnson muttered when she passed him. "Let's see how you handle real combat situations." Drill Sergeant Williams overheard the comment and stopped the entire exercise. "You got something to say, Johnson?" he barked. "Just wondering if Martinez here can handle pressure when bullets start flying," Johnson replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. The drill sergeant's eyes gleamed with something that looked almost like amusement. "Well, let's find out. Tomorrow we start weapons training. We'll see who can actually shoot straight when it matters." That evening, Sarah called her grandfather from the payphone outside the barracks. She told him about the challenges, the doubts, and the upcoming weapons training. Her grandfather listened quietly before sharing a story she had never heard before. "In Vietnam," he said, "we had a sniper in our unit. Quiet kid, barely 18, looked like a strong wind would knock him over. The bigger guys used to make fun of him, called him weak. But when the shooting started, that boy could put a bullet through a dime at 300 yards. Saved our lives more times than I can count. Size doesn't matter when you're looking down a scope, Sarah. Heart and skill do." The next morning, the recruits marched to the shooting range. Sarah noticed several drill sergeants had gathered to watch, which was unusual. Word had apparently spread about the challenge brewing between her and some of the male recruits. Sergeant Williams explained the exercise. They would start with basic rifle training, progress to moving targets, and eventually work up to combat simulation scenarios. The first day of weapons training revealed what Sarah had always known about herself. While other recruits struggled with the weight and kick of the M16, she handled it like she had been born with it in her hands. Her first grouping of shots was tight and centered. Her second was even better. By the end of the day, she had the highest accuracy score in the entire platoon. Johnson and his friends dismissed it as beginner's luck. "Anyone can hit a stationary target," one of them said. "Wait until we're doing combat scenarios with moving targets and time pressure." But as the weeks progressed, Sarah's superiority with weapons became undeniable. Moving targets, night shooting, rapid-fire exercises, she excelled at all of them. Her scores were consistently higher than everyone else's. including recruits who had grown up hunting or had previous military experience in their families. More importantly, she remained calm under pressure. During simulation exercises where drill sergeants would suddenly appear, shouting and creating chaos to simulate combat stress, other recruits would panic and their accuracy would plummet. Sarah's scores actually improved under pressure, as if the chaos helped her focus even more intensely. Drill Sergeant Williams began pulling her aside for additional training. He had been in combat himself and recognized something special when he saw it. "Martinez," he said one afternoon after a particularly impressive performance, "you've got natural instincts. Most soldiers have to train for years to develop the kind of situational awareness you show naturally." The weapons training culminated in a competition between all the platoons in their company. Sarah found herself representing her platoon in the individual marksmanship contest. As she walked to the firing line, she could hear the murmurs from the crowd of observers. Many still couldn't believe that this small, quiet young woman was about to compete against the best shooters from 4 different platoons. Her grandfather's compass was in her pocket. She had been allowed to keep it as her one personal item. She touched it briefly before taking her position. The range was 300 yards, and each shooter had to hit 5 targets of varying sizes under time pressure. Wind was strong that day, making the shots even more challenging. Sarah steadied her breathing and looked through her scope. The first target was the largest center mass on a human silhouette. She squeezed the trigger gently and the shot rang out. Hit. The second target was smaller, representing a headshot. Hit. The third target was partially concealed behind cover. Hit. The fourth was moving slowly across her field of vision. Hit. The final target was the smallest, designed to simulate a distant enemy combatant. As she lined up the final shot, complete silence fell over the range. Even Johnson and his friends had stopped their constant commentary. Sarah controlled her breathing, accounted for wind drift, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed across the range, and through her scope, she saw the small target flutter as the bullet found its mark. Perfect score. 5 shots, 5 hits, all within the highest scoring zones. The silence stretched for several seconds before someone began clapping. Soon the entire range erupted in applause. Even Johnson looked stunned. Sarah had not only won the competition, she had achieved the highest score anyone had seen in months of training cycles. Drill Sergeant Williams approached her as she was cleaning her rifle. "Martinez," he said quietly, "I've been training soldiers for 15 years. I've never seen natural shooting ability like that. You've got a gift." That night, the atmosphere in the barracks was different. The constant jokes and dismissive comments had stopped. Some recruits looked at Sarah with newfound respect, while others seemed almost afraid of her. Johnson approached her before lights out. "Look," he said awkwardly, "I guess I was wrong about you. That shooting today was incredible." Sarah looked up from the letter she was writing to her grandfather. "Thanks," she said simply. "But this is just the beginning. The real test comes when we're in actual combat situations." She had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. 6 months after graduating from basic training with honors, Sarah found herself deployed to Afghanistan as part of a forward operating base near the Pakistani border. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with rocky mountains and desert stretches that seemed to extend forever. The base housed about 200 soldiers, and Sarah was one of only 12 women stationed there. The transition from training to real deployment was jarring. The constant threat of enemy attack created a tension that never fully disappeared. Soldiers walked differently here, always alert, always ready. The joking and casual conversation of training had been replaced by focused professionalism and an underlying current of anxiety that affected everyone. Sarah was assigned to Alpha Company under Captain Michael Rodriguez, a seasoned officer who had completed 3 previous deployments. When he first met Sarah, his expression was carefully neutral, but she could sense his skepticism. He had read her training records and knew about her exceptional marksmanship scores, but combat experience was entirely different from range shooting. "Martinez," he said during their first briefing, "I know you scored well in training, but this is the real deal out here. I need soldiers I can count on when things go bad. Can you handle that?" "Yes, sir," Sarah replied without hesitation. "We'll see," was his only response. The first few weeks were relatively quiet, with routine patrols and security duties. Sarah was initially assigned to base security, which meant long hours watching the perimeter through binoculars and manning checkpoints. It was important work, but she could tell that her fellow soldiers still weren't sure what to make of her. Some were protective, treating her like a little sister who needed to be shielded from danger. Others remained skeptical about her abilities. Specialist Mike Chen, a veteran of 2 deployments, became something of a mentor to Sarah. He had seen enough combat to know that appearances could be deceiving, and he was curious about the quiet soldier who had earned such impressive training scores. "The thing about combat," he told her one evening as they shared guard duty, "is that you never know how someone will react until the bullets start flying. I've seen big tough guys freeze up completely, and I've seen small quiet people turn into absolute warriors. Training only tells you so much." Sarah appreciated his honesty. She had been wondering the same thing about herself. How would she react when facing real enemy fire? Would her training hold up under the stress of actual combat? These questions kept her awake many nights, staring at the ceiling of her bunk while listening to the distant sounds of the Afghan night. The answer came sooner than expected. On a hot Tuesday morning in September, Alpha Company received orders for a patrol mission to a nearby village where intelligence suggested Taliban fighters had been gathering supplies. It was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance mission: observe, report, and return to base. Sarah was assigned to the patrol as part of a 12-person squad, led by Sergeant First Class David Murphy, a combat veteran with a reputation for keeping his soldiers safe. When he saw Sarah's name on the roster, he approached Captain Rodriguez privately. "Sir, are you sure about putting Martinez on this patrol? She hasn't seen any real action yet." Captain Rodriguez looked at Sarah's file again. "Her marksmanship scores are off the charts, Sergeant. Maybe it's time we found out if those skills translate to the real world." The patrol left the base before dawn, traveling in 3 armored vehicles through the rocky terrain toward the target village. Sarah rode in the second vehicle, her rifle ready and her senses heightened. The landscape was beautiful in its harsh way, but she knew that every rock formation and dried riverbed could potentially hide enemy fighters. The village appeared peaceful when they arrived. Children played in the dusty streets while women carried water jugs and men gathered in small groups, talking quietly. The patrol dismounted and began their reconnaissance, moving carefully through the narrow streets and checking buildings systematically. Sarah was positioned on overwatch with Chen, scanning the surrounding hills through her rifle scope, while the rest of the squad conducted their search below. The morning sun was growing hot and everything seemed routine. Then Chen suddenly tensed beside her. "Movement on the ridgeline," he whispered into his radio. "About 400 meters northeast." Sarah swung her scope toward the location Chen had indicated. At first she saw nothing but rocks and scrub vegetation. Then a glint of metal caught her eye, the barrel of a rifle reflecting sunlight. She adjusted her focus and saw him clearly, a Taliban fighter positioning himself for an attack on the patrol below. "I have eyes on one target," she reported quietly. Armed male, approximately 420 meters elevated position. Before anyone could respond, the morning quiet was shattered by the distinctive crack of AK-47 fire. The Taliban fighter had opened fire on the patrol below, and within seconds answering fire erupted from multiple positions around the village. The peaceful reconnaissance mission had turned into a full-scale ambush. "Contact! Contact! We're taking fire from multiple positions!" Sergeant Murphy's voice crackled over the radio. Sarah could see muzzle flashes from at least 6 different locations in the hills surrounding the village. The patrol below was pinned down, taking cover behind walls and vehicles while enemy bullets kicked up dust all around them. She could hear the distinctive whine of rounds passing close overhead. "Martinez, can you see the shooters?" Sergeant Murphy's voice came through her earpiece. Sarah was already tracking targets through her scope. Her training had taken over completely, and the chaos around her seemed to slow down. She could see each enemy position clearly, could calculate range and wind drift automatically, could prioritize targets based on the threat they posed to her fellow soldiers. "I have multiple targets," she replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system, requesting permission to engage. "Take them out," came the immediate response. Sarah centered her crosshairs on the first target, the fighter who had initiated the ambush. He was still firing down at the patrol, completely unaware that he was being watched. She controlled her breathing, squeezed the trigger gently, and watched through her scope as the man suddenly jerked and fell backward. "One down," she reported. already swinging her rifle toward the second target. The second fighter was partially concealed behind rocks, but his muzzle flash gave away his position. Sarah waited patiently for him to expose himself for another shot. When he leaned out to fire again, she was ready. Another squeeze of the trigger, another enemy fighter eliminated. 2 down. The remaining enemy fighters seemed to realize they were being hunted by a sniper. Some changed positions, trying to find better cover, while others increased their rate of fire in an attempt to suppress the patrol and escape. But Sarah could track their movements through her scope, and her elevated position gave her clear lines of sight to their new locations. Over the next 20 minutes, as the firefight raged below, Sarah systematically eliminated threat after threat. Each shot was precise, calculated, and effective. She moved between targets with calm efficiency, providing covering fire that allowed the patrol to maneuver and eventually fight their way out of the kill zone. When the shooting finally stopped, an eerie quiet settled over the village. Sarah remained in position, scanning for any remaining threats, while the patrol regrouped and conducted a casualty assessment. Miraculously, no American soldiers had been seriously wounded, though several had minor injuries from flying debris and near misses. Sergeant Murphy's voice came over the radio. "Martinez, how many targets did you engage?" Sarah did a quick mental count of her shots. 7 confirmed kills, Sergeant. The silence that followed her report seemed to stretch forever. The ride back to base was unusually quiet. Word of what had happened in the village spread quickly through the convoy, and Sarah could feel the weight of everyone's stares. 7 confirmed kills in her first combat engagement was extraordinary by any standard, but coming from someone who had faced so much initial doubt made it almost unbelievable. Specialist Chen, who had been beside her during the entire firefight, broke the silence first. "I've been in this war for 2 years," he said quietly, "and I've never seen shooting like that. You saved a lot of lives today, Martinez." When they reached the base, word had already spread throughout the camp. Soldiers who had barely acknowledged Sarah before now watched her with a mixture of respect and amazement. Some seemed almost intimidated, as if they weren't sure how to process what they had witnessed. Captain Rodriguez was waiting for them at the vehicle bay. His expression was unreadable as he approached Sarah. "Martinez, I need to debrief you immediately." "Sergeant Murphy, you too." The debriefing took place in the command tent, with several officers present, including Major Patricia Williams, the base commander, who had flown in specifically to hear about the engagement. Sarah recounted the events methodically, describing each target and the tactical situation that led to her decisions. Her matter-of-fact delivery seemed to impress the officers even more than the impressive kill count. 7 enemy combatants eliminated, Major Williams repeated, studying the written report, all at ranges exceeding 300 meters under combat stress with moving and concealed targets. She looked up at Sarah. "Soldier, do you understand how exceptional that performance is?" "I was just doing my job, ma'am," Sarah replied. "My fellow soldiers were in danger, and I had the training and position to help them." Major Williams exchanged glances with Captain Rodriguez. "Martinez, we're going to recommend you for advanced sniper training. Your natural abilities combined with proper specialized training could make you one of the most effective long-range assets in this theater." Over the following weeks, Sarah's reputation grew throughout the base and beyond. The story of the small-town girl who had eliminated 7 Taliban fighters in her first combat engagement spread through military networks. Soldiers from other units would find excuses to visit their base just to catch a glimpse of the legendary shooter. But Sarah remained focused on her duties and her fellow soldiers. She volunteered for every patrol, every dangerous mission, every opportunity to use her skills to protect others. Her second combat engagement came 3 weeks later during a night raid on a suspected Taliban safe house. The mission was supposed to be straightforward: surround the compound, capture or eliminate high-value targets, and gather intelligence. But intelligence reports had underestimated the number of fighters present. When the assault team breached the compound, they walked into a prepared defensive position with multiple fighters armed with automatic weapons and explosives. Sarah was positioned on overwatch 200 meters from the compound, providing sniper support for the assault team. Through her night vision scope, she could see the situation deteriorating rapidly. The assault team was pinned down in the courtyard by heavy fire from fortified positions within the building. "Overwatch, this is assault leader," came the urgent call over her radio. "We're taking heavy fire from the second floor. Can you see the shooter in the northeast window?" Sarah had already identified the target. A Taliban fighter with a light machine gun was pouring automatic fire down into the courtyard, preventing the assault team from moving to cover. She could see the muzzle flashes clearly through her night vision scope. "I have eyes on target," she responded. "Engaging now." The shot was more challenging than her previous daytime engagements. Night shooting required different calculations, and the target was partially concealed behind a window frame. But Sarah's training and natural instincts guided her. She squeezed the trigger and the machine gun fire from the window immediately stopped. "Target down," she reported, scanning for additional threats. Over the next hour, as the raid continued, Sarah provided continuous overwatch support. She eliminated 6 more enemy fighters, each shot preventing potential casualties among the assault team. Her precise fire allowed the soldiers to maneuver safely and complete their mission. Successfully, the raid netted several high-value targets and a treasure trove of intelligence about Taliban operations in the region. But what military leaders talked about afterward was the incredible marksmanship display that had made the successful mission possible. Colonel James Patterson, the regional commander, arrived at the base the next morning specifically to meet Sarah. He was a career infantry officer who had served in Iraq and Afghanistan for over a decade, and he had never seen anything quite like her performance metrics. "Soldier," he said, studying her personnel file, "in 2 combat engagements, you've eliminated 13 enemy combatants with 13 shots. That's not just exceptional marksmanship, that's combat effectiveness at a level we rarely see." Sarah stood at attention, unsure how to respond to such praise from such a high-ranking officer. "Thank you, sir. I'm just glad I could help protect my fellow soldiers." Colonel Patterson smiled. "That attitude combined with your skills is exactly what we need more of in this war. I'm fast-tracking your application for advanced sniper school. You'll be heading back to the States for specialized training within the month." The news of her reassignment spread quickly through the base. Some soldiers were disappointed to lose such an effective asset, but most understood that her talents could be better utilized with proper sniper training and equipment. Sarah herself had mixed feelings about leaving her unit, but she recognized the opportunity to become even more effective. Her final mission with Alpha Company came 2 weeks before her scheduled departure. Intelligence had located a Taliban commander who had been responsible for several IED attacks that had killed American soldiers. He was hiding in a remote mountain compound that was too well defended for a direct assault. The mission called for a small reconnaissance team to get close enough for Sarah to take a long-range shot at the target. It would be the most challenging shot of her career, over 800 meters in mountain terrain with unpredictable wind conditions. Sarah studied satellite photos of the compound for hours, memorizing every detail of the terrain and potential shooting positions. She calculated wind patterns, elevation changes, and target movement patterns. This shot would require every bit of skill and training she had developed. The team moved out before dawn, hiking through rocky terrain to reach their observation position. Sarah carried her rifle and specialized ammunition, while the rest of the team provided security and spotting support. They reached their position just as the sun was rising, giving them clear visibility of the target compound below. Through her scope, Sarah could see the Taliban commander moving around the compound, recognizable from intelligence photos. He was surrounded by bodyguards and rarely exposed himself for more than a few seconds at a time. Sarah would have to wait for the perfect opportunity. For 3 hours she watched and waited, studying the target's patterns and calculating the complex ballistics required for such a long-range shot. Finally, the commander emerged from a building and walked toward a vehicle, presenting a clear shot opportunity. Sarah steadied her breathing, accounted for wind drift and bullet drop over the extreme range, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The shot seemed to take forever to reach its target, but through her scope she saw the Taliban commander suddenly collapse. "Target down," she reported quietly. Mission accomplished. The elimination of the high-value target sent shockwaves through Taliban networks in the region. More importantly for Sarah, it demonstrated that her abilities extended far beyond what anyone had initially imagined. She wasn't just an exceptionally accurate shooter. She was becoming one of the most effective combat soldiers in the entire theater of operations. The United States Army Sniper School at Fort Benning was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, even after her combat deployments. The students were all seasoned soldiers, many with multiple deployments and proven combat records. When Sarah arrived, she was not only the youngest student in the class but also one of only 3 women who had ever been accepted into the program. Master Sergeant Robert Kane, the chief instructor, was a legend in sniper circles. He had over 200 confirmed kills across 3 different wars and had trained some of the most effective snipers in military history. When he reviewed Sarah's file before the course began, he was skeptical despite her impressive combat record. 17 confirmed kills in just 2 months of deployment, he muttered to his assistant instructor. Either this girl is the real deal, or someone's been inflating numbers to make headlines. The sniper course was designed to break students both mentally and physically. The dropout rate exceeded 60%, and even experienced combat veterans regularly failed to meet the demanding standards. Students had to master advanced ballistics, weather reading, camouflage and concealment, stalking techniques, and precision shooting under extreme stress. Sarah's classmates included Army Rangers, Navy SEALs, and Marine Force reconnaissance operators, the elite of the elite. Many had initially dismissed her presence in the course, assuming she was there to fill some kind of diversity quota rather than based on genuine ability. Their attitudes began to change during the first week of training. The initial marksmanship evaluation required students to engage targets at ranges from 300 to 1,000 meters using various rifles and ammunition types. Weather conditions were deliberately challenging, with strong crosswinds and variable lighting. Most students struggled to achieve the minimum passing scores, but Sarah's performance was exceptional from the very first shot. "Jesus Christ," whispered Staff Sergeant Mike Torres, a ranger with 2 combat deployments, as he watched Sarah's targets through binoculars. "She just put 5 rounds into a group you could cover with a quarter at 800 meters. Master Sergeant Kane observed Sarah's shooting personally, watching her technique and mental approach. What impressed him most wasn't just her accuracy, but her consistency under pressure. When instructors would suddenly create distractions, shouting orders, setting off explosive charges, or introducing time pressure, her performance actually improved rather than deteriorated. "Martinez," he called after her first week evaluation. "Walk with me." They strolled to the edge of the range, away from the other students. Kane studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I've been training snipers for 12 years. I've seen natural shooters, lucky shooters, and technically perfect shooters. But what you're doing out there is different. How do you explain it?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I don't think about the mechanics when I'm shooting, Sergeant. It's more like the rifle and I become the same thing. I can feel where the bullet needs to go and my body just makes it happen." Kane nodded slowly. He had heard similar descriptions from only a handful of snipers over his career. Those rare individuals who possessed an almost supernatural connection to their weapons and targets. "That's a gift, Martinez, but gifts can be dangerous if they're not properly developed. That's why you're here." The advanced training pushed Sarah in ways her previous experience hadn't. She learned to calculate complex ballistics equations in her head while under stress. She mastered the art of fieldcraft, learning to move invisibly across terrain and establish concealed positions that could remain undetected for days. She studied the psychology of long-range shooting, learning to read targets and predict their behavior. But the most challenging aspect of sniper training wasn't technical, it was mental. Snipers operated alone or in small teams, often behind enemy lines, making life-and-death decisions without immediate support or guidance. The psychological pressure of that responsibility broke many otherwise capable soldiers. During the stalking exercises, students had to move across open terrain and establish shooting positions within range of instructors without being detected. The instructors used high-powered optics and thermal imaging to spot students, and the failure rate was extremely high. Sarah's small size, which had once been seen as a weakness, became a tremendous advantage in these exercises. "She's like a ghost," one instructor commented, after Sarah had successfully completed a particularly difficult stalking exercise. "I was watching that area for 2 hours and never saw her move into position." 3 weeks into the course, the students faced their most difficult challenge yet, a simulated combat scenario where they had to eliminate multiple targets while under enemy fire. The exercise used live ammunition in realistic battlefield conditions, designed to test everything they had learned under maximum stress. Sarah was paired with Staff Sergeant Torres as her spotter. Despite his initial skepticism about her presence in the course, he had developed tremendous respect for her abilities and professionalism. They were assigned to eliminate 3 high-value targets in a mock enemy compound, while other students played the role of enemy forces trying to locate and eliminate them. "Remember," Torres whispered as they established their shooting position 600 meters from the target area, "once you take the first shot, everyone's going to be looking for us. You'll have maybe 30 seconds to engage all 3 targets before we have to move." Sarah studied the compound through her scope, identifying each target and calculating the timing required to engage them all quickly. The targets were moving independently, presenting a complex challenge that required not just marksmanship, but tactical planning and split-second decision-making. "Target 1 is in the northwest building, 2nd floor," she whispered. "Target 2 is in the courtyard mobile. Target 3 is on the roof of the south building. I'll take them in sequence 1, 3, 2. "Why that order?" Torres asked. "Target 1 is stationary, easy shot. Target 3 has the best view of our position and needs to be eliminated quickly. Target 2 is moving predictably and I can time his movement pattern." Torres smiled. Most students would simply engage targets in the order they spotted them. But Sarah was thinking tactically about threat priority and efficiency. "On your call," he said, settling in with his spotting scope to observe the results and provide corrections if needed. Sarah controlled her breathing and centered her crosshairs on the first target. The man was standing at a window, clearly visible through her scope. She squeezed the trigger gently and the target immediately dropped. Without pause, she swung her rifle toward the rooftop position. Target 3 was scanning the surrounding area with binoculars, searching for the sniper team that had just eliminated his comrade. Sarah had already calculated the elevation difference and wind correction needed for the rooftop shot. Her second bullet found its mark before the target even realized he was being hunted. Target 2 was still moving through the courtyard, unaware that 2 of his companions had been eliminated. Sarah tracked his movement, leading him slightly to account for his walking speed. Her third shot dropped him mid-stride. 3 targets down in 12 seconds, Torres reported over the radio, genuine amazement in his voice. Moving to secondary position. The exercise continued for another hour, with enemy forces desperately trying to locate the sniper team that was systematically eliminating their leadership. Sarah and Torres moved between 3 different shooting positions, engaging targets of opportunity while remaining undetected. By the end of the exercise, Sarah had eliminated 8 targets without missing a single shot. Master Sergeant Kane was waiting for them when they returned to the assembly area. His expression was serious, but Sarah caught a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Martinez," he said, "that was the most effective sniper performance I've seen in this exercise in over 5 years. But more importantly, you demonstrated tactical thinking and team coordination that most students don't develop until much later in their careers." The final week of sniper school included the ultimate test, a live-fire exercise where students had to eliminate an actual target at extreme range under combat conditions. The target was a remote-controlled device designed to simulate an enemy sniper, positioned over 200 meters away in mountainous terrain. Weather conditions were deliberately harsh, with gusting winds up to 25 miles per hour and variable light conditions. Students had only 1 shot to hit the target, and the margin for error was virtually 0. Over the years, less than 30% of students had successfully completed this final challenge. Sarah spent the morning studying weather patterns and calculating the complex ballistics required for the shot. The target was positioned on a ridge that created unpredictable wind currents, and the extreme range meant that even tiny errors in calculation would result in a complete miss. "You've got this," Torres said as they established their final shooting position. As her spotter, he would help read wind conditions and provide range confirmation, but the shot itself was entirely up to Sarah. Through her scope, the target appeared impossibly small. At 1,200 meters, even the slightest movement of her rifle would translate to feet of error at the target. Sarah studied the terrain between her position and the target, watching grass and leaves for wind indicators. 6 months after graduating from sniper school, Sarah found herself back in Afghanistan, but this time everything was different. She was no longer the unknown soldier trying to prove herself. Now she was Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, a certified Army sniper with a reputation that preceded her throughout the military. Her arrival at Forward Operating Base Chapman caused a stir among both officers and enlisted personnel. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base commander, had specifically requested Sarah's assignment to her unit. The region had seen increased Taliban activity, including several high-value targets that conventional forces couldn't reach. Colonel Hayes needed a sniper who could operate effectively in the challenging mountain terrain and eliminate threats at extreme ranges. Sergeant Martinez, Colonel Hayes said during their first meeting, "Your reputation speaks for itself, but I want to be clear about expectations. We're dealing with experienced enemy fighters who have learned to counter conventional tactics. They know we have snipers, and they're actively hunting our long-range assets. This deployment will be more dangerous than anything you've faced before." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "I'm ready for whatever missions you need me to complete, ma'am." Her first assignment came within a week of her arrival. Intelligence had located Hassan Malik, a Taliban bomb maker responsible for IED attacks that had killed dozens of coalition soldiers. He was hiding in a fortified compound in the mountains, surrounded by experienced fighters and protected by natural terrain that made conventional assault nearly impossible. The mission required Sarah to infiltrate enemy territory alone, establish a concealed position within effective range, and eliminate the target without being detected. It was exactly the type of operation she had trained for, but the stakes were higher than ever before. Sarah spent 2 days studying satellite imagery and intelligence reports, planning her approach route and identifying potential shooting positions. The target compound was situated on a mountain ridge, providing excellent defensive positions but also limiting escape routes. She would have to get within 800 meters for a reliable shot, which meant crossing several miles of enemy-controlled territory. The insertion took place at night, with Sarah being dropped off by helicopter 5 miles from the target area. She carried her rifle, specialized ammunition, and enough supplies for 3 days of independent operation. The weight of the equipment was significant, but her training had prepared her for the physical demands of the mission. Moving through the Afghan mountains at night required every skill she had learned about fieldcraft and navigation. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep inclines that could easily cause injuries or create noise that would alert enemy sentries. Sarah moved slowly and deliberately, using night vision equipment to navigate while maintaining complete noise discipline. It took her 8 hours to reach her planned shooting position, a rocky outcrop that provided excellent concealment, while offering clear lines of sight to the target compound. She established her hide carefully, using natural vegetation and camouflage materials to create a position that would be virtually invisible, even to close inspection. For the next 18 hours, Sarah waited and observed. Through her scope, she could see movement within the compound and identified several potential targets, but Hassan Malik himself remained elusive. She documented guard rotations, movement patterns, and defensive positions while remaining perfectly still in her concealed position. The opportunity finally came on the second morning. Through her scope, Sarah watched as a man matching Malik's description emerged from the main building and walked toward a vehicle. Intelligence photos had provided detailed descriptions of his appearance and clothing preferences, and Sarah was confident this was her target. The range was 743 meters across steep mountain terrain with unpredictable wind conditions. Sarah had been monitoring weather patterns throughout her vigil and was prepared for the complex ballistics calculation required. She accounted for elevation, wind drift, temperature, and humidity as she prepared for what would be one of the most important shots of her career. "Target acquired," she whispered into her radio, though no one could respond due to communication security protocols. She was completely alone with this decision. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into her shooting position. Through her scope, she could see Hassan Malik clearly as he spoke with another fighter beside the vehicle. He was animated, gesturing with his hands as he gave instructions. Sarah knew that this bomb maker had caused immense suffering and would continue to do so if allowed to escape. She squeezed the trigger with the same gentle precision she had perfected over countless hours of training. The bullet's flight time at that range was nearly a full second, during which Sarah watched through her scope as Malik continued his conversation, unaware that his death was already traveling toward him. The impact was immediate and decisive. Hassan Malik collapsed instantly, and chaos erupted throughout the compound as fighters scrambled to understand what had happened. Sarah remained in position, watching for any indication that her location had been compromised. But the enemy fighters seemed completely confused about the source of the shot. "Target eliminated," she reported quietly, beginning the careful process of withdrawing from her position. The extraction was even more dangerous than the infiltration. Enemy forces were now actively searching for the sniper who had eliminated their leader, and Sarah had to move through their search pattern while carrying her equipment. She used every technique she had learned about evasion and concealment, moving only when necessary and remaining hidden during daylight hours. 36 hours after eliminating Hassan Malik, Sarah reached her extraction point and was picked up by helicopter. The mission had been a complete success, but more importantly, it had demonstrated her ability to operate independently in the most challenging conditions imaginable. Colonel Hayes was waiting when Sarah returned to base. "Outstanding work, Sergeant. Intelligence reports indicate that Malik's death has significantly disrupted Taliban bomb-making operations in this region. You've undoubtedly saved American lives." But Sarah's reputation was beginning to create an unexpected problem. Word of her exceptional abilities had spread throughout Taliban networks, and she was becoming a high-priority target for enemy forces. Intelligence intercepts revealed that Taliban commanders were offering substantial rewards for information about the ghost sniper who had been eliminating their leadership. 3 weeks after the Malik mission, this reality became dangerously clear. Sarah was assigned to provide overwatch for a convoy operation when Taliban forces launched a coordinated attack specifically designed to draw her into the open. Enemy snipers had been positioned to target likely overwatch positions, turning the hunter into the hunted. "Martinez, we're taking fire from multiple positions," came the urgent radio call from the convoy commander. "We need sniper support immediately." Sarah was positioned on a ridge overlooking the convoy route, and she could see enemy fighters engaging the vehicles from concealed positions. But as she prepared to engage targets, muzzle flashes from multiple locations indicated that enemy snipers were actively hunting for her position. The tactical situation was unlike anything she had faced before. Instead of being the predator stalking unaware prey, she was engaged in a deadly game of cat and mouse with skilled enemy marksmen who knew she was there and were actively trying to kill her. A bullet cracked past her position, close enough that she could hear its passage. The enemy had spotted her muzzle flash from her first shot and were bracketing her location with return fire. Sarah had to make a critical decision: remain in position and continue supporting the convoy while under direct fire, or withdraw to safety and leave her fellow soldiers without sniper support. The decision was never really in doubt. Sarah adjusted her position slightly, using the rocky terrain to mask her location while maintaining visual contact with enemy positions. Over the next 20 minutes, she engaged in a running gun battle with 3 enemy snipers, while simultaneously providing support to the convoy below. Her training and natural instincts proved superior to her opponents. One by one, she located and eliminated the enemy snipers, using their muzzle flashes and movement patterns to track them down. Each shot required split-second timing and perfect accuracy, as any miss would reveal her position to surviving enemies. When the engagement finally ended, Sarah had eliminated all 3 enemy snipers plus 4 additional fighters who had been engaging the convoy. The vehicles were able to continue their mission safely, and no American soldiers had been seriously wounded. That evening, Colonel Hayes called Sarah to her office for a private conversation. "Sergeant Martinez, I need to discuss something important with you. Your effectiveness has made you a target, and that's creating operational complications. The enemy is now planning missions specifically to counter you." Sarah understood the implications immediately. Her success had made her so valuable that her presence was changing enemy tactics and potentially putting other soldiers at risk. "What are you recommending, ma'am?" she asked. Colonel Hayes smiled grimly. "I'm recommending you for promotion to Sergeant First Class and assignment to our most sensitive missions. If the enemy wants to hunt you, we're going to use that to our advantage. But I need to know that you're prepared for the level of danger this represents." Sarah thought about her grandfather's compass, which she still carried on every mission. She thought about the small Texas town where people had said she was too soft for military service. Most of all, she thought about the soldiers whose lives she had saved and would continue to save. "I'm ready, ma'am. This is what I trained for." Colonel Hayes nodded and opened a classified folder on her desk. "Good. because tomorrow you're going to receive a briefing on Operation Silent Thunder, our plan to eliminate the Taliban's entire leadership structure in this region. And you're going to be the primary asset for that mission. As Sarah left the colonel's office, she realized that her journey from doubted recruit to elite warrior was far from over. The biggest challenges of her military career were still ahead, and the reputation she had built would now be tested at the highest levels of combat operations. But she had proven herself beyond any doubt, and she was ready for whatever came next.